Welcome to Future Learners, the show designed to empower students, parents, and educators. Join us as we explore the ever-evolving landscape of schooling, learning, and what it takes to succeed in today's world.
This episode is brought to you by Euka Future Learning, Australia's largest online, full-time education provider for pre-K through 12 students seeking a flexible, relevant and meaningful education. Visit euka.edu.au today.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Future Learners. I am Brett Campbell, CEO and Chairman of Euka Future Learning, and I'm joined by my amazing co-host, as always, Founder and Head of Education, Ellen Brown. How are you doing?
Really good, Brett.
One of my most exciting times of the week. We get to sit down and we get to talk about all things education, learning, development, you name it. And today we are back with a really, what would I say if I had to frame this topic up? A very pressing topic and a very, very important topic to many families, and especially after the article that you sent through last night, and I was having a good read through from the educator, and the topic is of school refusal. So something that's becoming more and more apparent and more common. But what we're starting to find is there's lots of underlying reasons and situations that has led us to where we are right now as it pertains to school refusal. So I am going to hand straight to you because I'd love for you to set the tone, because you've spent a lot of time in this area. You've even written a book around it. Well, we're in the process of finalizing all of that around this topic within itself. So I want you to guide us today. Where are we going to start with this specific topic?
Well, I think
where are we launching from?
I think it's really timely, like you said, Brett. I know there was a story on 60 Minutes. I didn't see it, but a story on 60 Minutes this week about it as well, and something that we're starting to see more and more of. I guess we've got to start with, what is it? How do we define what school refusal is? Is it just truancy? Is it just not feeling like going? How does that look as far as what a child is doing and what a parent is seeing and what a school is seeing? So I guess that's where we start first. I guess.
So let me share the article that I read that I read last night, because this might be able to help set the tone a little bit, and I guess highlight the current understanding of it. So this is an article from the Educator Online, and the headline is "School Refusal Impacts 2 in 5 Australian Families." Now, quick maths, that's 40%. So school refusal is impacting almost half of families, right? So it says 2 in 5 Australian families are experiencing school refusal, a new poll of public and private schools. So there's two nuances there. The Greens petitioned a poll, and they found that 39% of all parents of school-age students said their child had been unable to attend school in the past year because of anxiety and stress. The breakdown for public and private schools was 41% public, 35% private school, respectively. Now, the article does go on, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but that's really what we're talking about here. Essentially, 1 out of 2 almost, and I'm stretching a little bit there, but 2 out of 5, as this poll survey suggests, that it is infecting many, many, many families. So just to provide a bit of a framework for parents to be thinking through as we're discussing this topic.
I think one of the things that concerns me the most is that when you're trying to get information as a parent on school refusal, you're going to read articles or watch, clips, and they will be presented by someone and from a perspective of someone who quite often has done quite well through school. If you've become a journalist and you're quite well known, generally speaking, you've probably had a good school experience. And so what we're seeing is, if you're looking for information about school refusal, you're getting it from someone who's pro-school and only sees that as the right way, or from schools themselves who obviously feel that is the only right way for students to be getting their education. So that's why I was really excited to be able to talk about this today, and to talk about the fact that, school refusal, there's a couple of advocates, psychological groups that will say, instead of using the word school refusal, they would use the words school can't. So we're actually talking about students who actually, it's not as negative as school refusal, I don't feel like it, but there's some real psychological situations going on for that child. Like you said, anxiety and stress around going to school that have a deep rooted, have a deep rooted base for the child themselves. And so it's not just the
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a bad day, or I don't want to go, or my friend was really mean to me yesterday, or or the teacher was angry. It's not that kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that a parent will see, and a parent will be able to see that it's far more than that. It'll be things like, for example, a child who isn't even physically. I know I was listening to a parent talking whose child wasn't physically able to even get out of bed. They're little and they've stopped eating. The stress is so bad. They're crying about school the night before they even go to school. You're seeing young ones wetting the bed again. All kinds of ways it's manifesting itself. And so even the title school refusal is such a negative one, instead of understanding that there are some kids that are really having a difficulty with school. And interestingly, it can happen at any age, and it can happen to kids who've previously loved school. And so there'll be a trigger event, and it might be an event that we can work through and move back into school, but it might be an event that says that's the end of the line. So we see a lot of students coming to Euka in grade 7, or in Queensland it'd be grade 8, going into high school, where that's a huge shift event from primary school into high school, and all of a sudden they're out of their depth, they're feeling uncomfortable in a situation, something's happened like that, a big movement, or something's happened, a tragedy in the family at home, or lots of reasons that a student will all of a sudden manifest this feeling that it's more than just a feeling, it's a physical and mental feeling that being at school is just an impossibility for that child. So that's what school refusal is. It's not just I don't feel like it.
And because when I hear the word school refusal, before I understood it, to me, it comes across as though the kid is actually refused access to school, right? So this is why I'm such an advocate of what is the definition of that specific word, because we need to make sure that we're having conversations about the same thing. And quite often, if someone's debating school refusal, it's like, are the children not allowed to go to school, or is it the kid refusing to go to school?
Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah.
Because again, those are two different dynamics,
Yeah.
because they need to be handled and worked in different manners, because again, two totally different situations as to why they are there. So
this is basically saying the child
when it comes to, because again,
sorry, I was just going to say, this is basically talking about saying a child is refusing to go to school, which is really the negative term that we need to get away from. It's often a school can't rather than a school refusal.
So let me talk to you about that, because I want to play a bit of devil's advocate here, because I know there'll be people listening as well, because I know you said in the outset that a lot of these a lot of feedback and a lot of the information from journalists and schools are obviously always going to be pro school, right? The argument is, well, of course, Ellen, you're going to be pro homeschooling, right? Because that's what we do, that's what we offer. So I want to play a bit of devil's advocate there, in a sense of, what would you say to someone who's going, okay, of course you're going to be biased towards this way of operating or solution? What would you say to that, first of all?
Look, I'm glad you brought that up. It's actually quite far from where I am. So I personally had a wonderful school experience and loved it. I loved everything about school. I then became a teacher. And that was because I had such a positive school experience. And lots of the students that I had in my classroom enjoyed school. There were bad days and good days and subjects they didn't like, but on the whole, they were really happy. They were catching up with their mates. They were doing some things that they were interested in. school was a great thing. My personal journey into school refusal and understand, even into homeschool in general, came from this, and a lot of families that will be the springboard into homeschooling. But I was able to see one of my children who was flourishing at school, school captain, all those kinds of things. I saw he developed this an anxiety around school, and the whole process of feeling as a young parent that, oh well, the school knows best, let's keep pushing, let's let the teacher drag him off,
Mm.
let's virtually toss him into the classroom and run off, like all the things that I was told that we should do, the right thing to do, culminated in
Mhm.
irritable bowel syndrome that carried on for years and years. And so looking
Mm.
back on that, I have to say to myself, well, look, when school was right for him and it was good for him, then it was good for him. When the time came that it
Mm.
wasn't good for him, I would be able to say, well, okay, in hindsight, you know, there might be a time, and there might be some students where it's great all the way through, but I certainly wouldn't say I'm biased one way or the other. I think
Mm.
it definitely comes down to a child's needs.
It absolutely is. I use the metaphor. It's the old putting a square peg into a round hole. It's like, how many times are we going to try and put the square peg into the round hole?
Mm.
Up until fairly recently, alternate learning, online education, homeschooling, future learning is fairly new on the landscape for many parents. They weren't even aware of it. I mean, I speak to people all the time still. My fam, we went on a holiday recently just for a week back to New Zealand, and I was sitting on the plane next to a gentleman. He was like, the old, what do you do, etc. We started talking, and he's like, oh my God, it's funny you think that, because I've got a son right now who, he's a smart kid, but he just does not fit into school, and he'd rather be doing this, and this. I'm like, well, here's what most parents think, and they're not really aware of the opportunities and so on and so forth. And he's like, I was going to send my son to a private. They do online learning privately, and it's like $30,000. I thought, wow, okay, that's a significant investment, especially compared to how we operate and our availability. But it was, and after probably a 45-minute conversation with this gentleman, he was like, oh wow, I'm really going to look into this now, right? Because again, our biggest thing, and this is the reason for this show as to why we do this every week, we try and record every single week, is to start shining a light of awareness around this. And many parents right now are faced with, my kid doesn't fit school. However, our life right now, or my child's coming home complaining about school, or sometimes not even talking or complaining about school, but there's this unbelievable resistance to moving forward and stepping forward to go to school, and that can lead into, oh, I'm feeling sick. And it's like, that gets you a day off school. Oh, I'm still feeling sick. It's like, is your child actually sick, or is there something underlying there? And let's be honest, most parents are not psychologists or behavioral experts to be able to see the signs beneath the actual signs, right? And because that's where the truth lies in many cases. It's not what's expressed outwardly. It's you peel the layer of the onion off, and it's down in the fifth layer of the basement is where the actual situation is, and it's because of XYZ reason. You talked about with one of your children having irritable bowel syndrome. A lot of physical ailments derive from emotional stress or emotional holding on to said thing. I spent 15 years in the fitness industry, and in my early years, I was, didn't have a clue about anything, but the further you deep dive, the more studies you look into, and you see the causation of something, and you're actually trying to not put a Band-Aid on something, you're actually trying to get to the root cause as to why this is occurring. You quickly realize that, your sore knee has nothing to do with your sore knee. It's to do with your lower lumbar. It's your spine. It's because of this reason. Same thing comes back to, my child doesn't want to go to school because they're saying they don't like XYZ. But what is it really? So let's speak to that for a minute. What would you suggest? Because again, I want this to be as practical as we possibly can for families listening. Is so they've got a child, and the child is not enjoying school, or they're starting to see a pattern of this school refusal, refusing to go to school now. Where do they start? What do they do?
I think that it's it makes sense to be guided initially by, um, first of all, talking to the school about the problem. So, the school's quite limited in what they're able to do, and they'll offer
Yep.
things like I mentioned before, they're still doing the same thing. You bring your child to the classroom directly rather than the playground, and that might work. There might be a child that it's the initial getting to school, they're uncomfortable. There might be a younger child, they're uncomfortable in the big playground setting, but if you're allowed to walk your child to the classroom and the teacher meets you there's all those kinds of things that the school will put into place. And I would assume by
Mm.
the time people are talking to us, they've probably been going through that process, where they've done that. They might be going to school part-time and then doing things like that. I think the problem lies in the fact that there comes a point where you actually have to make sure that what you're doing is listening to your child. So if your child's saying, I'm
Mm.
feeling really sick, they probably are. Like that anxiety
Yeah.
that will manifest in a way that they are unwell, or there's something, like
Yeah.
I said, wetting the bed, or all of a sudden for a kid that's not a little one anymore. So you're going to have to get to the point of being able to now, they may not even be able to verbalize what it is that's the problem. And in those cases, it's even more pressing, because if the problem is that their little mate was mean to them or threw their sandwich on the floor or something has happened, that's something you can address. But if it's a situation where the child can't even really put their finger on it, they're just really unhappy, and the school is
Mm.
saying, oh, these are you should be getting tough, and we've got to do this, you need to listen to yourself and your child as well. You need to understand that no one, even the teachers or the school, will know what your child needs better than you will know. And if you feel like
Mm.
you've put a couple of those things into place and it's not working, and that it's not benefiting your child, then you've also got to say to yourself, what if we push through here, and my child is going to school but they're miserable, and it's a teenager, and they're dark, they're coming home, they're in their
Mm.
room, there's no communication going on. Is that success? So it comes down to
Mm.
listening to your child, and also trusting that inner voice of a parent. How many times have you heard parents take it to their kid to the doctor a lot of times, and said there's a problem, and the doctor hasn't diagnosed the problem, but the parent knows? It's that same kind of thing about
Mm.
learning to
It's
trust.
intuition.
Yeah, trust your inner voice. That
Your gut
relationship
feel.
with
Yep.
that you've got with your child, that is not replicated in the classroom with the teacher. They might really like it. It's not the same.
Mm.
They're not going to know your child. It's okay to say school is not the answer, because success
Mm.
needs to be a child that's growing into an independent, thinking, comfortable, confident person. That's what success looks like. And so that's where it can get blurry. All the messaging that you're getting from the media and from school is success is getting your kid into the classroom. But I think we need to
Yeah.
redefine what success
Yeah.
looks like for our children.
Well, something to double click on that is, and this goes back to the article that I referenced up front, was so the Green Senator Penny Allman Payne said, the findings reinforce the need for urgent action on the recent Senate inquiries recommendations. She says this polling shows that school can't is not simply a niche phenomenon. It's experienced by a majority of families, impacting hundreds of thousands of people. And then she says this: it should be a wake-up call for governments and education departments that the school system is not capable of responding and adapting to the complex needs of our kids, and that it is increasingly not fit for purpose, right? But then furthermore, she says, whilst, and this really articulates the point, while school refusal is often blamed on disability or mental health challenges, right? And we'll do an episode on mental health challenges in the very near future, because that in itself is such a big ball of confusion for so many people. Because what's happening these days is so many things are just getting handballed into that's under the mental health bracket, and we'll just put it over there because it's easier to deal with as one big whole entity, versus, again, diagnosing the source of where this situation is coming from. But she says it's either blamed on disability, mental health challenges, or passed off as misbehaviour. The reality is this is a product of extreme stress response, which leaves the child simply incapable of attending school. Now, if you understand even basic psychology and human behavior, is quite often what is being said is not the actual thing that is trying to be said. And us as adults struggle to communicate ourselves. I mean, adults quite often and quickly can act like a 6-year-old at the flip of a switch, which is quite ironic. So we who are adults who have lived for decades, in many cases, still struggling to be able to articulate and communicate our feelings. How do you think a 6, 7, 10, 15-year-old is going to be able to articulate their feelings, right? They're also at the stage of their life where hormones are running wild. They are at that point of discovery of life, right? So there's so many other outside ailments that are purported onto their way of thinking, and they still have to navigate their way through. And then you put stress of school, and it's like you got to get in there, you got to harden up, you got to push through. Which again is a topic that I want to talk about here, because it's how far have we gone off the rails of, I know my grandfather would have said, just harden up, boy, get in there. Even my school teachers were like, harden up, toughen up, and to a degree, that is okay for a square peg who is sort of just a little bit out of shape for a square hole, if that makes sense. So there are a segment of children and even people in general that you can massage into the right place. They're just a couple of degrees off. But for some families and for some children, and whether it's the 2 out of 5, or if you actually narrow that down, it ends up being, 1 out of 8 that are actually legitimately they are the square peg that will never fit into that round hole. That, I think, is the important piece to uncover first and foremost, right? Am I just persisting for something that is just not ever going to fit properly?
Okay, so look, obviously it's important that our kids need grit and they need to be able to handle things that are difficult for them. There's no doubt that they will get that. None of us can grow older without having to handle difficult things in life. But what is really important is to think about what it would be like for an adult, if they were working in a job that they felt uncomfortable in, or an atmosphere that they felt uncomfortable or vulnerable, or that it just did not suit them. We wouldn't say, well, you know what, that's just, you've got to toughen up and you've got to stay there for the next 10 years because that's just what you've got to do. You'd say, okay, well, you know what, you've got what you need from that job. Let's find the right job that's going to fit you. And so as a parent, to advocate for your child is the...
Unfortunately, though, that's the minority, though, isn't it? Because I sit there and I encourage everyone, especially at Euka, is I say, the day that you start to lose passion in what you're doing here, I need you to speak to me and I will help you find something, or we can either solve it or help you reignite that passion for whatever reason, because outside influences do tend to impact the internal influences as well. But it's like, I'd much prefer someone to be happy and enjoy what they're doing, and I'll go out of my way to help them find another job somewhere else doing something that they would much prefer to do. However, that's the minority, like super minority, because the majority of parents and families, or adults in this day and age, they've been programmed to have one job, their career, they live in the same house, they do one holiday a year if they're lucky. So there's a lot of that old programming, especially if you start looking anyone over 45. That's sort of the programming. I was brought up on the precipice of that, where I seen my grandparents. My granddad had one job. The routine was the same. Whether you enjoyed it or you didn't, that's just what you had to do. Now we're living in a world where there's options, and I mean, there's almost a debate to go, is there too many options? Is there too much flexibility? Because there's something here, again, and this article is quite a lot that they talk about. But there's an Australian psychologist, said Michael Horton, a distinguished Australian psychologist with over 30 years of experience and expertise, who specializes in addressing child and teen anxiety, challenging behaviors, and navigating tough conversation. He said, Part of the student absenteeism phenomena is that some parents succumb to their child's wishes to stay at home and avoid school, even when illness is not presenting, right? While in the past, children may have missed the odd day due to illness or medical appointments, going to school would have been the norm and a routine part of every child's everyday life. So I come from that school of, it was very rare for me to ever be sick, and very rarely did I ever see my peers sick either. Like, it was almost like, oh, where are they? Where in today's age, obviously, and I don't have no statistics on how many children are actually staying home. That'd be something that we should have a bit of a deep dive into. That'd be probably mind blowing, to be honest. But it's like, how far, and this comes back to that topic of grit, and how far do we push? How far do we persist with getting your child to school? What's your thoughts? Because I got some thoughts around it myself.
Oh, look, it's one of those things that's it's hard to put like you can't put a number on how many days and when does it turn from just not wanting to do something to actually having a problem. But even if you've got a child who consistently is saying to you, "Oh, I don't feel well, I don't want to go to school." What's that about? Why is that happening? Like, even if that's happening and it's not school refusal, it's just like once or twice a week, there's a reason. There's a reason, like you say, the passion isn't there, the friendships aren't there, the challenge isn't there. There's something going on there. Like, there's people moving into homeschooling just because of that their child's just not enjoying the school process. It doesn't have to be school refusal, but what we need to know is there's something that you will know as a parent when your child has reached the point where they just can't go to school anymore. Your relationship with your child you'll be able to see it, and it's not even a question anymore. And I think the biggest question is, like you said, about this old school thinking. The old school thinking that the successful child goes to school. I think that's the thing that we need to change. We need to reframe it and say a successful child is a confident, independent thinker who's enthusiastic and passionate about their future. That's what success should look like. And whether they get that by going to school and doing their education there, or whether they get that because they're doing home education and following passions outside of their school process, it's being able to say that both paths are quite legitimate, but not to just frame it as one. I'm absolutely sure that within 5 years, when this new cohort of homeschoolers who we've got flourishing off through university, when they become psychologists and when they become journalists and people who are decision makers, the conversations that we see in the media will be very different about the way somebody's judging, whether a child is deemed successful or has enough determination if they're not going into the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely apparent that not all people fit a specific way of doing things, right? So that's absolutely apparent. And again, I'll play the other side of this coin, is though, and because I really want to make sure that families have some actionable things that you could actually start moving towards before you just go, you know what, school's not working, let's just put them into homeschooling. That may be a solution, and it is for many, but it's also not a solution for everyone. What my suggestion there would be, and I got a really good friend of mine who's a psychologist who works specifically with early teens as they're sort of transitioning into the big wide world, and some of the conversations that he shares, more high level, because obviously patient confidentiality, all of those things, but it's some of the conversations that he says that he's having. It's just like, you have to be someone who is trained to be able to help someone articulate what they're feeling. And I will frame that by saying, as a parent, your job, from, again, my perspective, but the best thing that you can do is firstly identify that maybe my child is a square peg and they might not be suited for the round hole right now. Okay. That's step one. Step two is then you need to go and seek. I would absolutely recommend that you go out and seek professional help and have your child speak to someone who can actually help navigate them along a conversation. Because as a parent, if you're not trained, if you're not trained in communication or psychology or human behavior, et cetera, you are only limited with the tools that you have. And the tools that you have are going to be predicated off what your parents had and what you taught and what you were equipped with as you were growing up, and you're only going to have limited bandwidth, and you're going to go to them, what is it, what's stopping you from going to school? Oh, I don't know. And no one's going to want to answer you in an environment where you're like, well, what is it, just tell me and I'll fix it. It's like, that is not how you get someone to open up about something that's truly dark and scary or fearful for them, because that's really what it is. It's like, how can you create an environment where your child is confident enough or courageous enough to be able to start talking about what it specifically is? It could be one instance that happened on the playground that made them feel so unbelievably embarrassed that thing there could be the thing that's stopping them from wanting to go to school, because they don't want to face that person again, or they don't want to feel that feeling again. And until you can help unlock that, you don't know, right? So I definitely encourage everyone to, this is something I've been talking about a fair bit lately, even with friends, is I recommend everyone talk to a psychologist. Find someone that you can actually talk to, and whether you meet them once a month or you every couple of weeks, depending, on what's going on, but it's always such a good thing to be able to talk and share. And there's just something about talking with I'll say a stranger, but someone that there isn't that, oh my God, they're going to judge me. This is just going to be too hard to confront. So I definitely recommend exploring those options. And look, there's a lot, and the government are doing a lot better than they were as it pertains to mental health now. And there's a lot more resources and rebates and, things that the government are going to help you, especially here in Australia. We're very, very lucky on that aspect, where you can get the government assistance to help that. And it's unbelievably important. It's, your child's just saying, harden up, get in there, it'll be all right, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal, because it might not be a big deal for you, but it could be an unbelievably insurmountable ordeal for your child, which it clearly is if they're refusing to go to school.
Look, I do agree with you about getting some professional support in that conversation. I would also, I guess, preface that with the fact that, like I said before, you want to try and find someone who is pro options and not necessarily pro school is the only
Yep.
way. Because quite often, if you're going to go to a psychologist, they may have a real bias towards school is the only way and let's get this kid back into school. That's what success looks like. So having those conversations,
Yep.
it may be that you need to see more than one person to find somebody who's about pro options. I suppose that's the most important thing. And then, for a family that,
I mean, any psychologist though, any psychologist worth their weight in gold though would, and again, it's like every industry. You go to a fitness trainer, you go to a builder, you go anywhere. It's like, everyone has their initial biases, but the frame that I would hope the parent would go to is, it's nothing really about school. They're trying to get to what is this pain that my child is currently experiencing and where did it come from? Yeah. And it will probably originate back to school, of course, or someone at school. And then what you might find though is once that diminishes, maybe school is the absolute best thing for them. But the flip side of that is, the decision of whether you homeschool your child or you put them back through the mainstream, let's call it marketplace in many ways, will be predicate on what that nucleus of frustration and pain and causes for your child. So,
and
it's
I'd also like to say, just because you go through a period of school refusal doesn't necessarily mean that's a forever thing. So we've had plenty of experience here at Euka where a student has come and they've spent a year or two with Euka. They've developed as far as they've developed, their confidence is developed, and they're actually eager and wanting to go back into the school system. So there's those kinds of options too, where sometimes kids need some time out from from what they're doing, to be able to recalibrate, to be able to grow. Perhaps in some cases it's a separation anxiety, and it doesn't have to be wrong if a child needs an extra year to be at home, to be in that comfort zone, and then to develop, like, oh, now I want to do my own thing. So it's not unusual that they need that kind of thing as well. So knowing that there's options to move out, address whatever it is, help them and let them grow and develop, and then listen to them. They'll even say, I'm ready to go back to school. That's where I want to go. And that's a whole different thing for a parent, and quite exciting to see if that's the journey that's right for them. And then, look, let me just say, I've also seen many, many kids that will come out of school with a school refusal situation, and a parent will say, "Oh, we can't imagine how this teenager is going to be able to get on and get a job." But we've seen them then go off to university and have no problems with socialization and grit and determination, all the things that they need. So it is something that is it's more than a hiccup in a family. There's a lot of stress involved and a lot of tears involved from the children, from the parents. It's a really, really tricky time, but to know that it is a surmountable thing. This isn't something that needs to take over, the whole of life forever, and that that they will flourish through the other side of that, whether it's going back into school if you decide to bring them out, or if it's going off to university. Is a completely different thing. And so to see parents' surprise in having a child that was so disengaged and so sad, and then seeing them flourish at the other end, it's something that we at Euka have been very proud to be part of that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a concept called, and it was interesting because, again, I'll revert back to this article here. Concept called gradual exposure, and as I was reading it, Michael Horton, the psychologist I referenced, he actually talks about gradual exposure as well. And interestingly, just recently, I watched another podcast, and someone that we both admire in the field of education and psychology, and just an academic, is Jordan Peterson. And I was listening to a podcast with him just recently, and I've heard him talk about this a lot, but that whole concept of, how do you get someone to move towards something that has now, I guess, paralyzed them with fear or something. And it is that gradual exposure theory. It's that take a very, very small step forward first and foremost, right? Like, before you get your child ready for school, it's like, could you see yourself even going back to school? And it's like, that's the first step of going, well, I might be able to, and then you just you incrementally look at, and it takes time though. This is where it's hard, because for parents who are busy and you got to work and you got to get to work on time, and your life right now, you probably think, well, I can't afford to have my child at home for 3 days or 2 days or this or that. The first thing that you need to do as a parent is really go, well, can I afford not to work through this right now? And be there. And if it's not you assisting your child through, who is that guide that is going to help them through? But again, to that topic of gradual exposure, it's like anything. It's someone who struggles to go to the gym, or they're like, I need to lose 20 kilos. And it's like, well, before you even think about losing 20 kilos, how about we just get you thinking about, could you even go to the gym? Could you sign up to a gym membership? Let's just start there, right? So we're breaking down this massive barrier. We're breaking down this massive barrier or task, as someone might see it and go, let's just break it down to its smallest incremental piece. Excuse me. So that in itself is a really smart way of being able to think through the solving of said problem, right? So before we wrap up, Ellen, is there anything else that we need to share or touch on right now as we sort of bring this conversation to light? Because we're going to have many more conversations about it. It's a very important topic, and there's about 7-8 subset conversations that could stem off of this itself. But I think we've done a pretty good job at least highlighting the situation itself. But is there anything else that we might have missed?
No, I don't think there's anything we've missed. I think, I really always want to feel as though when we've had a discussion about something that we can end it with, I guess, hope for parents who might be navigating this at the moment, and to provide a voice that's a little bit different in saying, think about what success looks like for you, your family, and your child. Feel empowered to be an advocate for your child, and that school refusal doesn't mean that school's over forever. It may be that you can, like you say, there's lots of options like gradual exposure and things like that the schools are quite commonly implementing as you're trying to navigate it. But if the time comes that school is not the right place for your child, that doesn't mean that you have failed in any way, shape, or form, or that you're not a tough enough parent. It may be that you're engaged with your child and you know that you need to do something different for a while. But there is success on the other side of that, and we've seen hundreds of children come through that and either go back to school or move on to university or into work and really flourish. So it's just nice to know that this difficult time isn't going to last forever.
Absolutely. Well said. So there we go. Let's wrap this episode up. Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying these episodes, please do us a massive favor. Head over to iTunes or wherever you consume these podcasts. Drop us a 5-star review. Leave us a comment. If you'd like myself and Alan to tackle any specific topics, make sure you let us know about it. Leave us comments. And if you got value from this episode, share it with someone else that you may know who would get value from it as well. So thank you very much. And Alan, I will see you very shortly. But everyone else, have an amazing rest of your morning, evening, midday, depending on when you're consuming this. You might even be on the treadmill right now, busting out a workout. Good on you. Keep going. And we'll see you on the next episode. Ciao.